You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers about hikers for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, it's good to be back with you all on the last Mighty Blue podcast before I head to California tomorrow morning to take on the TSX Challenge. I'm pumped about it, though I'm a little nervous because most of you know that my Achilles heel is altitude and we're heading up pretty high. Still, I'll never know till I try it, will I? The plan is to get this episode up and another one today. It's just a minute before noon as I speak this on Wednesday the 24th before I go. Our guest today is Kelly Thomas, or Spotter, and I met her through cyberstalking her dad, who posted about a Katahdin summit several weeks ago. As you're going to hear, he didn't get straight back to me, but I eventually heard from Kelly, and she agreed to come on today. Also on the show is the end of the road for Katie Westling, after 2 seasons battling through the AT. We already knew that she planned to finish last Saturday morning, and I was determined to be speaking with her as she finished. It worked out. Then we have quite an announcement with a conversation with a previous guest, Paul Collins, who goes by the glorious trail name of Skunk Ape. Paul is on after Katie. Finally today, I can announce that I'll be finishing the massive Chapter 6 of Then the Howl Came by George Stephanos with a 20-minute slug today, then the balance next week. So, with so much to do, let's meet Kelly Thomas, or Spotter. Here she is. I saw today's guest in a post on Facebook just a couple of weeks ago. Her proud father let the world know that his daughter, Spotter, had just finished the AT. So I messaged him and asked if he could get Spotter to be on the show. So that's where it actually originally broke down. And it was a few weeks before Spotter herself reached out to me. This is Kelly Thomas, or Spotter. Hey, Kelly, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And so was your father playing it cool or what?
Oh, yes. Yeah, my dad is very, very proud of me, but he kept it simple for Facebook.
All right, I see. So did he not get my message, or thought no, she won't want to do that?
No, he actually didn't get it till that evening when I messaged you. He just missed the whole notification. And he's like, oh, hey, look, somebody messaged me. And then I looked at the date and I was like, oops.
That's funny. Well, first off, of course, many congratulations on finishing. I know what it takes to do this, so congratulations.
Thank you.
And I believe it was the end of July, which was so I think you started in March, so it makes it just over 4 months. Was it faster than you imagined that you could do it?
Absolutely. I had actually anticipated finishing probably in September, and right. I had made a goal that I want to finish by the end of August to kind of beat the coldest weather in Maine.
Sure.
So when I started getting closer and closer, and I'm like, whoa, I think I'm moving a little bit faster than I thought I was.
So, I know when you first start, and you went Nobo this year, and I know when you first start, you're trying to feel your way into it, aren't you? And you get your legs and start moving. What sort of mileage were you putting in then?
In the very beginning, I actually started with a friend. He came out to do the first 7 days with me. So I actually preferred that because he's a little bit slower of a hiker than I am. So it was going to force me to stay at lower miles. So I was doing probably anywhere between like 9 and 14 miles for the first week. And then
you must have had some pretty long days later on.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I think my longest day was 31 miles.
Oh, my God. I don't even like driving 31 miles, let alone bloody walking 31 miles. We did a 26 miles once, and that just near damn killed me. And it was the easiest part of the trail as well. So did you keep your zeros down to a minimum? Because to finish in, 134 days, something like that? To finish in that period of time, you can't be going in and out of town all the time. Did you generally stay on the trail?
I tried to, yes. I only had 7 days of zeros, and 2 of those were doubles. I tried to keep it to about every 30 days doing a zero.
Oh, my God. So you literally were on the trail for nearly a month at a time?
Yes. Yes.
And all that entails, no showers and stuff like that.
Oh, no, I dipped into town for some showers.
Oh, right,
I tried
okay.
to go into town once a week, but
Oh, right,
I didn't
right.
take zeros in town.
Oh, I meant to ask you earlier also, why are you a spotter, by the way?
Back in 2019, I had an attempt with the trail, and I ran into this lady at a footlog crossing over a creek, and she was too afraid to cross, so she had been sitting there waiting for somebody to show up. And I tried to help her, showing her different ways to go across, but she was too afraid. So, story short, I got into the creek and I held her arm as she crossed on the footlog.
You're a regular little trail angel there, weren't you? Crikey. So you get your feet wet to keep somebody else's feet from getting wet. I'm impressed. I'm impressed. So let's go back to what you were doing out there in the first place. How long has the AT been on your radar?
Probably close to 10 years now.
Right.
Probably a little under. I actually heard about the Appalachian Trail the first time was reading Wild by Cheryl Strayed, and she mentioned the AT in her book,
Right.
and I had never heard of it prior to that. And I was like, what is this? And started doing research, and from that moment, I said, this is what I'm going to do one day.
I tell you, Kelly, I've been shocked by the number of Americans who don't know about the Appalachian Trail. Many of them live pretty close to it and don't even know about it. So you're reading a book about the Pacific Crest Trail. So did you know generally about that or not?
I just knew a little bit, but not very much until I read the book. I didn't really know about long trails at all until I read that book. And then
but you've always been a hiker, though, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been a hiker for a while, yeah, and backpacking.
Right. So what was it then? What was it about the AT? Because Cheryl Strayed tells a great story. Like Bill Bryson, she didn't finish the trail, but, it doesn't seem to matter. and so she told a great story. But what was it about the hardships on the trail or the romance of the trail that appealed to you?
Oh, just being out in nature every single day. Because being out in nature is where I'm the happiest, where I'm the most content. And the idea of being out there day after day after day and not having to come back to quote unquote real life was, it just sounded perfect to me.
Really? And was the actuality as good as you'd imagine it was going to be, or was it better or worse?
It was better than I could have imagined. I didn't have a single bad day on trail. I had some bad moments.
Whoa. Come on.
I didn't.
So at the end of every day, you got into your tent and you thought, this was just damn great.
Yes, honest to God. Every day was a great day. I had bad moments. That you can't get around bad moments, but I never let those bad moments ruin a whole day for me. I
feel the need in that case to interrupt you and ask you for a bad moment then.
Oh, gosh. Bad moments were waking up because my inflatable sleeping pad had a hole in it, waking up in the mornings with on the ground and cold, or bad moments were when the rain came pouring down and I got drenched and it was a little cold outside. And so those things are just moments, but you dry off, you wake up, you inflate your sleeping pad, and you move on.
But you saw others on the trail, and some people live their misery, don't they, when they're out there? And they don't find a positive in anything, do they? So how were you able to get over those bad moments, or was it just that whole thing of being out there just filled you with joy?
That's exactly it. Everything about being out there made me happy. And so I was able to easily look over the negatives because everything around me was positive. And it was just something that was an inconvenience to me at the time, because nothing truly bad happened to me on the trail. Everything was just an inconvenience. So just looking at the plants or seeing a rabbit go across the trail in front of me or something like that would snap me out of any negative thinking I may have had for that moment, because I got so excited to see something new.
It's funny, this thing about seeing rabbits run in front of you and snakes run in front of you sometimes, or not run. I don't what snakes tend to slither, don't they? They don't run. I found one of my biggest shocks. I'm only thinking this out loud now while it occurs to me. I often didn't see things running around around by me because I was concentrating the whole time on not falling over, which I failed at spectacularly many times. Looking at my feet, were you shocked at how much you have to look at your feet when you're hiking?
Yes. In the very beginning, I was able to look around a lot more. And then once I hit Virginia and the rocks started getting more and more frequent, and they just got worse as you traveled north. Yeah, definitely was surprised that I wasn't able to look up as often as I would have liked to.
Yeah. We hiked in 2014 and 2019. In 2019, actually 2014, I saw 9 bears, but I only saw 1 in 2019.
Wow.
And I wonder whether there must have been loads of them around me. I just didn't bloody see them because I was looking down all the time. So the AT was on your radar. You heard about it and you started reading about it, and I presume you went down the YouTube rabbit hole, which really opens the whole thing up, doesn't it? When did you decide that this was something you were going to do? Was it once you read Cheryl Strayed, or did you start planning, or what was the process to be actually getting on trail? Because I know you first started in 2019, so how did you get there?
Oh, well, Cheryl Strayed's book was the seed, and I said, I want to do that, but it was kind of just like I want to do that thought, but not really, I'm going to do this. So it wasn't until I started reading more online about it, started watching vlogs, and I was just like, this is spectacular. This is something I'm going to do. And in 2016, I actually moved to Western North Carolina, and I was living there for a couple of years. And I was just 30 minutes from the Appalachian Trail and the Smokies and by Max Patch. And so, getting to explore that on a daily basis if I so choose, I fell in love. I fell in absolute love with it and said, oh, yes, one day this is going to happen for sure.
So it went from being an idea to a possibility to a probability. But, actually pulling the trigger is more difficult because a lot of these vlogs, and I don't knock anybody for doing it, and I admire anybody for doing these vlogs, and we'll talk about yours later. But a lot of them, I wouldn't say they necessarily always give a rosy picture, but they often do because no one's going to film themselves. Well, not many people are going to film themselves when they're as miserable as Sid, are they? So they don't represent themselves being miserable on the trail. So do you feel you got an over-glamorized version of it, or was what you saw out there what you imagined it would be from the vlogs?
No, I think that's the truth. I think the majority of vloggers show just the good aspects of the trail. There are some that show the bad moments and show their emotions. And
yes, some very emotions.
Yeah, there are a few out there, but I do think that just watching the videos, even my own, it's hard to grasp exactly how hard the trail is, even when the hikers are talking about the not so happy moments on trail.
This is why I said to you the other day, Kelly, I said, tell everybody your stories for about the next, 3 weeks after you finish, because they won't be interested at all in about 3 weeks' time. So get them out of the way.
Right.
So you went from the idea of doing it to doing it. So you started in 2019. How did you actually prepare to get on the AT? Because you can just pitch up there because I did that, but how did you actually prepare to be ready to hike the AT?
Well, as far as gear goes, I already had all my gear because I've been backpacking for years prior to that. So preparing for that part of it was simple. I didn't have to really buy or gather anything new.
Interesting. So, but can you say you've been more day hiking than backpacking, hadn't you? Or had you actually done several overnights as well?
Oh, I'd done a lot of overnights, but it was mostly just overnights, not anything longer than that.
But it is different, don't you think so? The longer term overnight, as it were. I think if you spend 2 weeks, 3 weeks on trail or something like that, you kind of know what you're in for after that, don't you? I don't think you do after I suspect you don't after just one night, but I may be very wrong here, by the way. But so did you actually have to change any of your gear, or was it all totally dialed in?
No, I think pretty much all for the first attempt in 19, all of my gear was dialed in. I don't think I had to really buy anything or switch anything out.
All right. And I presume as you were a hiker, the physicality, you already had some of that physicality anyway, so you were ready to do that. Did you? Oh, well, yeah. Okay, we all get, we all think we're fit until we get on the trail, don't
exactly.
we? Exactly. But then you find out you can get fit. I don't think the physicality is a problem personally. I think you just have to get into it and get moving, and your legs will eventually respond to you. So, and I know that you're in your mid-30s. I believe that's right.
37.
That's a kind of tricky age to put life and career on hold. How are you able to sort that out?
Well, it's been a dream for a long time, so it's been just squirreling away here and there, and eventually 2019 was supposed to be the year, but since it didn't work out for me that year, I still had that money put away. So then it ended up being moved to what was supposed to be 2020, which, the world happened. And so then it just once again got pushed back to 2022. So I had the funds, and I just left my job.
So the dream never died then?
Never died. No.
But you did go in 2020, in 2019, which was which is the year I went as well, was before COVID. Yeah. Tell us about that experience, but going in 2019.
Well, that year, everything just went wrong for me. It was the total polar opposite from this year. When I started, I had the reasons that I had to come off trail, at least when I went northbound, was I take a daily medication for medical reasons. And prior to leaving, it was not working the way it was supposed to help me out. So I said, well, I don't have time to play around with it. It's right before I'm supposed to leave. So I just left. And within 2 weeks, I knew I had to come off and fix it. And so I left the trail, and it took about a month to make the adjustments. And then I said, well, I'm not done with this trail. So I decided to hop back on going southbound, because I knew I had started in April in 19. So I didn't want to come back to where I left off.
Why so late, by the way? Why? Because people out there, traditionalists, will tell me April is the time to go. Right. But that is relatively late, isn't it, for most people? Why did you decide to go then?
I don't like the cold. I hate the cold.
But that means you were going to get it at the back end. If you took your 6 months you were planning before, you would have got it back. Because trust me, Maine can get really cold, can't it?
My reasoning behind that was, if I'm close to the finish, I'm more likely to just deal with the cold than if I was at the very start of my hike. So I said, I'll start later and just deal with it at the end.
And you got a bit of a kneecap issue as well, didn't you?
Yeah. When I was in the 100-mile wilderness, my left kneecap kept popping out of place.
How did you get to the 100-mile wilderness when you were going north? You then turned around to go south, did you?
No, that was in 19 when I had decided to go back on trail and do it southbound.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So that's when my kneecaps started popping out of place. And I had an old injury from it. So I just didn't expect it to start giving me problems. And unfortunately, with Maine's terrain, with the uneven rocks and roots, and it started causing me a lot of problems, and I had to come off.
And of course, with Katahdin as your approach trail, if you're going southbound, which is the most ridiculous idea ever.
Yeah, well, in 19, Katahdin actually didn't open until June 15th, so I didn't even get to climb Katahdin.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
You know what? That explains something to me, which I'll come back to later in a minute. That's good to know that, actually. So you had that experience. You had got off to do with the medication, and you got back on, then you got off because of the kneecap.
Right.
Had those experiences cemented in your mind that this was something you really had to do even more?
It was. I don't like not completing something I set out to do. So being that I had done those two different areas, and I said, no, I have to finish everything in between, and I have to summit Katahdin. It's a must.
Oh, right. Okay. So we'll come back to that in a minute as well. So the experience of doing it, made you want to do it more, obviously. But did it open your eyes a little bit about your preparations and your gear? Did you make any alterations when you went again in 2020 and then in 22?
I definitely started to look at lighter gear. I already had a fairly lightish pack, but I wanted to get my base weight even lower, especially being that I did end up having surgery on my knee to fix the problem that was causing my kneecap to come out of place. So I didn't want to add any extra stress to my joints than need be. So I did end up switching out quite a bit of gear to get lighter weight.
And how did the knee treat you after the operation? Was it okay? Was it okay this year?
Yeah, this year, actually, I had zero problems with it. It was amazing because I was worried about that because I hadn't done any long distance hiking since the surgery, just
Right.
a couple days here and there. So I was worried about it, but it held up beautifully.
Right. So having gone northbound in 2019 and southbound in 2019 and got off, you were planning to go in 2020. Did you actually go on the trail in 2020, or did COVID hit early enough for you not to even get on the trail?
It hit early enough. I had a flight booked for the end of May.
Oh,
yeah, I was
dear.
going to go southbound, so it hit before I ever even stepped foot on trail. So I just canceled it. I said, no, another year.
Well, the good news is we're coming to 2022, and obviously we've already told people that you actually did do it this year. Did you consider doing leaving out the bits you'd already done, or did you start from the beginning again to the end? What did you do?
Well, that was never a question for me. I started at the very beginning and I did everything over again. I'm what they would refer.
How'd that feel?
Well, I've actually done Georgia. This was my third time doing Georgia. So people kept saying, "Why are you doing Georgia for a third time? Are you crazy?" And I said, "Well, I'm a purist. I want to be a through hiker, and so." Being a through hiker means starting from the very beginning and going all the way to the very end.
So the through hiker label was quite important. And funnily enough, that reminded me, I kind of, obviously I've got notes, we've talked about this in the past, so I'm trying to work out the story in my own head about this. One of the things that I did a section of the show a couple of years ago, which was fear and loathing on the Appalachian Trail, which was things you were frightened of. And one of the biggest things people are frightened of was not finishing. Yes. Were you concerned about that at all?
Oh,
was that important
very
to you?
much. Yes, I was, especially since going northbound in 19, I had to come off. And then going southbound in 19, I had to come off. So I was so afraid coming out this year that there would be something that would stop me again this year. And you know, being that I am getting older and my body, even though I'm only 37, it's falling apart. I've had too many surgeries in the last few years. So I was a little concerned that, you know, something, either one of my previous surgeries would be a problem for me or something new would pop up. But it's like everything fell into place for me for this year. Everything.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, I'm going to share something with you I haven't told anybody else before. I did consider going for a third time on the AT, and I would love to still do it one day. I'm not sure whether I will or won't. But one of the things that would sort of put me off was because I've had two perfect hikes. I've done both of them. I've been injured, but I've got off and I've fallen, but I always got to just twice got to Katahdin. I'm thinking if I went again at this age and I couldn't do it, oh my gosh, not that it would mar those attempts, it would just piss me off so much. And it's almost, it's not the reason I won't do it, but you know, it is in my mind that having had two great hikes, why would I do it? You had two that were truncated, but now you've got this one. You can retire undefeated now.
Yes,
that's pretty good. So you headed north again from Amicalola at the height of the gathering bubble. Yeah. What were those early days like with so many people around?
Interesting, very interesting. I met a lot of characters, some a little bit more of a character than others.
Good word for it.
Yeah, it was pretty busy. It wasn't as busy as I thought it would be, being that they mentioned that this year was actually going to be the highest number of hikers starting. Right. So I anticipated it to be like a zoo, and it wasn't that bad, but there were on average anywhere between 20 and 40 hikers a night.
Oh my
typically.
Gosh. Wow. Yeah. Was there enough room for, I mean, I know I went in March first time and February second time. I'm sorry, I apologize, keep talking about my hike. But I'm listening to you and the things you've experienced and so on. Was it bedlam at around the shelters, or did you go in shelters, or did you stay in your tent?
Surprisingly to myself, because I don't like shelters, I slept in more shelters on the trail than I actually did my own tent.
Good Lord.
There was never an instance where I didn't get a shelter that I wanted, surprisingly. But I think it was mainly because most hikers preferred to tent it. So I never had any problems with that, except for when it was really rainy days. Those are when the shelters would usually get the busiest. But I'm an early morning hiker, so I would beat everybody to the shelters.
Oh, right. So you'd often finish about 3:00 in the afternoon, did you, or 2:00?
Exactly.
That's kind of nice. And I know you like to hike alone, yet many hikers, especially women hikers, look for the security and fun, I'm sure, of a tramley. You never sought that out, did you? Why was that?
I actually prefer the solitude. I prefer to hike alone and be in my own thoughts and just hear the sounds of nature rather than the talking between, you and another person. And it was just more tranquil to me, more peaceful. And then also the fact of logistics and compromise on the trail. I wanted this hike to be my hike, not somebody else's. And you have to do a lot of compromising when it comes to a trail family.
I agree. I think one of the things that people should think about when they're doing this hike, they should think of their hike first always. If it works out, they're hiking somebody else's hike because it suits them to do so, that's fine. And if you recognise that it's a compromise, but it should absolutely be yours. You should almost be selfish enough to make this is my hike and I'm going to do it my way. If you want to be along with me, that's great. If you don't, that's also great. Yeah. And I think, I don't think people quite realise that when they get out there. If they want it to be their own hike, they have to set the pace. They have to set what they want to do. But you obviously interacted with other hikers at shelters and so on. Did you always feel secure out there?
Yeah, there's only one instance at a shelter where I felt a little uneasy with a certain person in there because you could tell they were not a thru hiker, even though they were stating they were based off of their gear and what they were wearing. And so I felt a little uneasy, but my way of doing it was, let me talk to this person. And so I started having a conversation and oh my God, we talked for like 3 hours. So it ended up being a comfortable situation. I didn't have any problems with him and it was fine. So it's, I think when people feel uncomfortable, they tend to want to get out of the situation instead of rather kind of finding out why am I feeling uncomfortable and solving that problem rather than, okay, crap, I got to pack up all my gear and head out to the next shelter now because I don't feel comfortable.
That's interesting. I was about to say mature. You're still less than 40, but do you think your maturity helped you there? You know how to handle people in real life. You do what you do. That maturity as a woman, as opposed to a young girl, that probably gave you more security than you would otherwise had you been a 17 or 18-year-old.
I think that plays a part, yeah, because you have a little bit more life experience, and I think at a certain point you are able to trust your gut a little bit better. Sure. And you've had different situations that you had to deal with in your life, that a 17 or 18-year-old won't. So I think that definitely plays a part. Just being a little bit older and more wiser, I guess.
And when we spoke the other day, you told me you were especially lucky with the weather. I've never had anybody say how lucky they were with the weather. Most people got poured on or baked to death. So it all worked out for you, did it?
It did. I had the best weather the entire way through my hike. I have no complaints. I think in the entire 134 days I spent on trail, I hiked in rain maybe less than 10 times. And out of those 10 times, maybe 3 of them were in hard rain. It's I
almost don't believe you. That's almost impossible.
It is truly unbelievable. I have subscribers to my vlogs who have said that I am the luckiest vlogger they've ever watched when it comes to the weather.
And you mentioned you vlogged the hike. Was that quite a commitment for you? I don't know how you posted. I've seen a couple of your little vlog posts. Was that a commitment for you all the time? Was it something that you needed to do, you wanted to do? How did you work out you wanted to do that?
Well, it started, I wanted to do it just for my own memories and so my family could kind of follow along on my journey.
Sure.
And then I decided, you know what, maybe I'll make it public and do it for a good reason. So I started to raise money for the elephant sanctuary in Tennessee. And so I decided to make it public. And
whoa. Elephants in Tennessee?
Yes.
Where do they come from?
I love elephants. I mean, I love all animals, but I love elephants. And I wanted to, if I was going to do it publicly, I said I might as well do it for a good cause.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. And you know what? You can't fake this stuff. I watched your summit video only about 20 minutes before we started recording. You were in floods of tears.
I was.
You're a blubbering mess at the end. Can you put into, because I know you went up by yourself, didn't you?
I did, yes.
And I don't know how you had two films, but we'll talk about that another time perhaps. But can you put into words what you were feeling at that moment? 'Cause I know the feeling, by the way. It's overwhelming. You suddenly see that side. What did you feel like at that time?
Oh gosh, just a mass of different emotions, and it just all came flooding in. I felt pure happiness and excitement, but at the same time, I felt this sadness come over me at the same time, that this is over. I've been for years and years wanting to do this, and now here I am, the very last moment, it's done. And so it was just happiness, excitement, overwhelming sadness. Like, I can't even begin to describe all the emotions that I felt. It was just a ball of them.
It was a very liquid expression of those. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah, no question. And with the benefit now of, thanks to your father, by the way, of 3 weeks to think about it, have those feelings evolved about the hike, or is that moment you still feeling that thing, or you feel accomplished, excited, or sad? I mean, what are you feeling 3 weeks after?
Oh, it's so hard to process. Doing this hike meant so much to me before I ever even stepped foot on the trail. And then every moment that I had was just memories and emotions. And it's almost impossible to describe the feeling I feel now after it's done. It's just, there aren't words. There really are not words to describe to somebody who hasn't done this hike what it feels like. You feel accomplished because you set forth a goal and you finished it, and it was not an easy goal. And
really?
So it feels spectacular, but it almost feels surreal that you look back at this and you could pull up a map and say Georgia to Maine and say, I hiked all that way, but it doesn't seem real. It's just because you're doing it in such small increments, day after day after day. Yeah, and it adds up, but there are no words. You have to hike it and experience it to know exactly what somebody feels after the hike, because there aren't words to describe it.
I've got to say, for somebody who didn't have any words, that took me about 3 minutes to tell me. But I entirely understand how you feel. Now, I'm going to ask you what I'm calling my Betty questions, and people who listen to the show may have heard this already, because one of our listeners is going to do the hike next year, and people are planning for next year, and they have these sorts of questions. So 5 quick questions. It's a quick answer. What did you love most about the hike?
The wildlife. Seeing the wildlife and all the different wildlife that I don't see at home was my favorite part.
Wonderful. I know what you mean there as well. What do you hate about it?
The cold rain.
Which apparently you didn't get my job,
really.
So that's good. And were you to do it again, and who would be foolish enough to do it again, apart from me, of course, were you to do it again, what would you do differently?
Oh, that's a hard one. I don't think I would do anything differently. I don't have any regrets on my trail, on my hike. None. I think I do it exactly the same. And
you know why you should? I think that's absolutely the right answer, because the fact that you're on top of Katahdin Sign, whatever you did in the interim got you there. So it all worked. So I think that's the right answer as well. What did you wish you knew before you started that you learned out there?
That the rocks start in Virginia.
And they never stop. That's funny. And what was your best gear choice?
My best gear choice was, even though I hardly used it, was my umbrella.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And it wasn't to keep the rain off, it was to keep the sun off.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, very nice too. So what do you want to do next?
The Colorado Trail. I already have my sights set on it for next summer.
Okay, well, lovely. Well, look, I think your answer about you would do nothing differently is what I think most people should say who have actually stood on that sign. And I entirely identify with what you said about, it's tough to express what it feels like. Just get up and go and do it, because, you'll never have an experience like it in your life.
Never.
Yeah. Well, look, thanks for coming on and talking to us about it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll speak again soon sometime.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Cheers then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Mid-30s demographic seems to be growing on the trail, and I definitely like their perspective. There were a few in 2019, but hardly any in 2014. It only enriches the trail, in my view. When I went, it was old guys like me and youngsters, but there are more and more in their 30s and early 40s who feel the need to get out on trail and do this. You can check out Kelly's YouTube channel at Unbound Crow. Great name. I'll have a link in the show notes. Spotter seems to be a singular person who wants the solitude, as many of us do, yet, as you could hear, she's clearly very chatty and open as well. Before I share my conversation with Katie, I wanted to let you all know that going forward, I'll only be sharing Facebook podcast updates on my own Hiking Radio Network Facebook page. I've been sharing to around, 20-odd sites over the years, and it isn't really fair to the admins and the members of those sites. Most have been great. Some have been a bit snippy, so here's what I'd like you to do. If you listen to one of our shows or any of the HRN shows and you really like that episode, please share it wherever you're a member and tell fellow members why they should listen. Can you do that for me? Thanks. So, last Saturday, just after 10 a.m, I called Katie. Here's where she was.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Katie. Now, just so listeners know, Katie just sent me a text. She's got 0.4 of a mile to go. So what is the total mileage you've done to date then? 2,100 whatever it is, 90 something?
2,193.1 less 0.4.
Oh, dear me. How do you feel? How are you feeling?
I feel great. I'm a little manic.
Oh, yeah, I bet you are.
I'm hiking this morning with Hugh Ickrath.
I know.
And he came in to meet me this morning at the shelter. He got in early, said he had to use his headlamp. So that was great.
Well, say hi to Hugh for me. That's great. In fact, I'd like to speak to Hugh, actually. That'd be a good idea if we just have a quick chat with him in a minute. But What's the last few days been like?
Kind of nice, actually.
Oh, the rain stopped. The rain stopped, did it?
Rain stopped, yep. I was able to do, one day I did 16 miles, one day, a couple of days of 14 milers. And so I made some big miles. So the last 2 days were not huge. So today's easy, and yesterday was kind of easy. Spent one night stealth camping up on a ridge near Dripping Rock.
Beautiful.
And heard coyotes. Nice. It was really cool.
So what's your predominant feeling? I know the excitement of finishing today, but have you got a, are you starting to feel a little bit regretful this is it, or are you happy this is it?
No, I'm not regretful this is it. I did it. And, my big goal was to have an immersive experience in the mountains on the trail. And even though I had to suspend it for several months, I feel like I was able to have that experience. So, yeah, I'm feeling really good about it.
I had a strong feeling of accomplishment. And not in a braggadocious, if that's the word, sort of way, but more thinking calmly accomplished. Do you have any of that at the moment?
I do. It's it's a little overwhelming and difficult to process that you've walked that far, but it's nice and it's a good feeling, and now it's really something that I'll always have with me.
So does this feel like your Katahdin?
Yes and no. I think Katahdin itself was it's so iconic. So it's something that's been in your head for years, and to do it is so iconic. And I think that would be a cool way to finish. But this is more of a peaceful, yay, I'm going home, tomorrow the whole family's getting together, and it'll be, just celebrating. And so that will be fun. And so I'm really happy about that. And So it's a good feeling, but I don't think it's a Katahdin feeling.
No. So what time did you leave? Because you stayed at the shelter, which is that only about 4 miles, 5 miles from Rockfish?
4.8.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So going to sleep last night, you're thinking, this is it. I'm getting up tomorrow. So, and then you woke up this morning. Was the excitement mounting?
Well, I actually fell asleep around 7, and then an entire group of, youth group came into the campsite and had no experience with backpacking or coming into camps.
Right.
The etiquette of it all. So I'm like, oh man, I just want to go to sleep now.
Did you tell them what you were doing, what has happened?
I did talk to a few this morning. I thought last night better not go out of my tent or I might
right.
might not be civil. Anyway, but yeah, it was impactful. I, had time over the last few days to process and think a little, because I had shorter miles, so I could process and think, well, what does it all mean? And, and so that was nice.
Did you come to any conclusions on that?
I think I did. I think that, going back to seeing the bears in Bethlehem, all those bears, thinking,
sure.
Time to think about it was, that's not right. That's not how it's supposed to be, and so, thinking about the mountains, the forests, our oceans, how they, if they're given the opportunity, they are incredibly resilient. Yeah. But, I think for me, that this is it's a signal for me to, put some of my energy now and resources into holding my political and corporate leaders accountable for policies and trying to, to give these systems the opportunity to be resilient and recover. So
yeah, it's funny actually. It's a path that you're on that stretches all the way back to Georgia and all the way forward to Maine. You're just at one part of that trail, and you've done all of the rest of it as well. And but we do share that path with animals, and I know it. I think you realise the importance of that when you're actually out there, and you want to preserve, you want to make sure it's well looked after as well, don't you? Have you noticed and I was constantly aware of this. Have you noticed how remarkable it is that 2,190 odd miles is so well looked after, so well preserved?
Right, I do. I feel like along the trail, definitely, and you can see places like in Maine, like Katahdin. Katahdin is revered. You can see they're taking care of it. You can see that those areas, they want people to enjoy it, but they also recognize the significance, of the ecosystems within those areas. So, I did see that. I will say for the most part, the dedication to doing that.
Now, can you see the end in sight at the moment or not?
No,
you can't quite see it.
I think we've got about another 1 mile.
Well, let me quickly have a quick word with Hugh with your phone if I can, and then I'll come back to you for a second.
All right, Steve. Here he is. You want to chat to you?
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Hugh. How are you?
I'm doing great. Great.
Isn't it cool to be with somebody who's just about to finish?
Oh, it's so exciting. I told her it's kind of like, I feel like walking with her to the end. It's kind of like my Katahdin here. And it's just a great experience.
Yeah. But once again, you're going to be sleeping in the bed tonight, aren't you? Quite right.
That's right. And I'm going to go get a nice meal tonight. And I'm going to be in air conditioning.
Does it, it's funny. So
business as usual.
She seems to me, and I've followed her obviously for quite a time, almost like a giddy young girl. Does she feel that way to you as well?
Absolutely. She's got an excitement for the trail and this whole thing, and she's definitely, clearly enjoyed herself, but is clearly going to be glad to be home.
Yeah,
very
sure.
clearly.
Well, I just want to say thanks for going out there. You know, not that you're representing me, but I feel like you're representing the show in many ways as well. It feels great that we've got somebody hiking with her, and obviously I know you as well. Yeah, thanks for going out there, because it must be really nice for her to know there's all the support.
Yeah, I was so glad to be able to do it, and it's turned out to be just an absolutely beautiful day. And I got to hike in the dark for the first time ever. So
how was that?
I did that. So
how was that?
It was kind of scary. It was funny. Scary. I was like, how long is my headlamp going to last?
That's right. Well, look, let me.
No, it's all good.
Well, let me just say goodbye to her. We'll speak soon, okay, mate?
Sure thing. Hey, and good luck with your upcoming trip there.
Thanks very much.
Hope it works out well for you.
Appreciate it.
Right now, here she is.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Hey. Okay.
Yeah, so you must be almost there now. So I'm not going to get in the way of your family reunion. I'm gonna. Yeah. You know what? I'm super proud of you. Not that it's my place to be proud of you, but I am. And I think you presented such a great positive vibe to people. Like, I think people can't fail to be inspired by what you've done, and I just hope that you just enjoy it. So enjoy these times. Remember what I told you. Tell your stories for the next 3 weeks, because no one's going to want to know after that. All right.
Right. Steve, I just want to thank you. And, I told you before that listening to your podcast, I listened to them literally for years before I even set out on my trek and my journey. And it has been a blast, checking in each week with you and chatting, just like meeting up with an old friend. So
that's nice. Enough of the old. Do you mind? Enough of the old.
A friend.
A friend. That's better. Right. What I'm going to do then, Katie, in a couple of months' time, I'm going to check back with you, see how you are, and just come and say how, if you've not revised your views, but your views will evolve in the next couple of months. So watch out for that and really enjoy this moment today and enjoy the next few days, because that feeling of accomplishment should be strong, because it's quite a mission to do. All right.
Well, thanks so much, Steve, and I really thank your audience, your fans.
That's cool.
Again, it's great to have Hugh here with me.
Yeah, it's great. I'm delighted. All right, Katie, enjoy your family, enjoy the rest of your hike.
All right, thanks, Steve.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
She was like a giddy schoolgirl, wasn't she? Why not? As she said, she's done it. It may not have been her original plan, but it was her hike on her terms. And she got there, met by her family and friends, and hiking with my friend Hugh. Wonderful. As I said, those early reflections sometimes evolve over a little bit of time, so I'll have her back on the show in about November and see how she is. Well done, Katie. Thanks as ever goes to our supporters, without whom we would not exist. This week we've had recurring donations from Ann Pickin, Sean Deadwiley, Emmanuel Bravo Ramos, Alan Troy, Jessica Diaz, Hugh Ickrath, who you just heard from, and Michelle Brown. We also received a very kind donation through the mail from Ted Deal. Thanks to all of you. You genuinely keep our shows up and running. Talking about being up and running, we've got a bit of an announcement. Here's Paul Collins or Skunk Ape. So today we've got an announcement to make. This is a friend of the show who's been behind the scenes helping us out dramatically, or helping me out dramatically. This is Paul Collins or Skunk Ape. Hey, Paul, how are you?
Hey, Mighty Blue. How you doing?
You've been an absolute blessing to me, let me tell you. Paul has been, you've probably seen the fancy new artwork we've got on all our shows. Paul does all of those. It's amazing, and it's been so helpful to get those done and really helpful for us as a network to get done. But also, even more importantly, he's been editing Jester's shows, which, trust me, has saved me so much time. So I'm delighted that you've really helped us out. So as a result of that, he and I have been talking. So tell us, Paul, you've got an announcement to make, haven't you?
Yes, I sure do. So Mighty Blue and I have been talking, and for the longest I've been thinking about starting a podcast myself. I'm real big into hammock camping, and there's really no...
Now there's an understatement, by the way.
Yeah, right. But there's no, I think there's only one other podcast out there about hammock camping, and it's very sporadic on when it comes out and everything. But, the hammock community it's just growing, it's becoming more and more popular, every year. So I figured, I wanted to start a podcast and start talking about, hammocks and hammock camping and all the different group hangs that are around that you can go to and everything else.
Well, funnily enough, I didn't realize there was like this explosion of hammockers around. I know a lot of people love, when they get hammock hanging, or they sleep in a hammock, it appears to be they rarely go back to the ground. And Paul invited me and Jester, and actually Courtney came as well, didn't she, last year, along to HangCon, which is in Florida. Oh my God, the variety of stuff that's out there is remarkable.
Yeah.
And so when we talked about it, I said, great. One thing that we do on the network, where we are, and you referred to this just now, if there's another show out there that's not consistent, listeners like to know the show will be out at a certain time and a certain date. Right. Paul is a perfectionist when it comes to that sort of thing, and he understands that as a concept, don't you, Paul?
Yeah, I'm a little OCD with certain stuff. And that would be one of them.
I need to actually take the blame, by the way, for the fact that this hasn't actually already been out, because I'm terribly tardy about getting things done. I'm trying to prepare for my trip away to Whitney, which when this comes out is probably going to be, actually I'm leaving the day this comes out. Okay. So I've been delaying getting the show up, but I intend to try to make sure the show is up. So tell us, what are you actually calling the podcast?
The podcast is the Hammock Hangers Podcast.
Okay. So it's somewhat, it isn't redundant, because I'm going to ask you what the show is about, but it's the Hammock Hangers Podcast, so there's a bit of a clue there. So What is the show, what's the thrust of the show actually going to be?
Well, there's a variety of things that people that I'm going to talk to. I'm going to talk to the average everyday hammock hanger, find out their story of how they got into hammock camping, why, talk to them about, the different things that they've learned that has, helped them and everything. So that way when, because there's always a lot of people that are interested in hammocks, but they're not real sure. So I'm trying to make it to where, even those people that listen to the podcast can get, better ideas of what hammock camping is about and everything.
Sure.
I'm also going to be talking to, a lot of the cottage, vendors that, make the hammocks and the stands and the quilts and everything else, to find out, their story as well of how, they got into it and then why they branched out to start making the gear and everything else.
So in your knowledge, and I'm guessing the answer here, but I may be wrong, but I think so. In your knowledge, if someone starts on the ground, so to speak, and then ends up in the trees in a hammock, do they ever go back to on the ground, or what the reasons they do?
Very few go back to the ground. What I've noticed, though, is a lot of the ones that do end up going back to the ground, the reason being is they have heard about hammock camping, and then they ran and jumped on Amazon and bought some, $30, $40 hammock setup, and of course, it's like about a 9-foot hammock that you're not going to get comfortable in, and so they think that that's what all hammocks are. And so, it's just a thing of not having the knowledge. And that's what I'm hoping, with this podcast to, help spread the correct knowledge of everything.
So how do you see this developing? Are you going to, because one thing I know about podcasting, I know my podcast today isn't what my podcast was when I started, although there are certain things that are pretty much the same. It does develop, are you been thinking, because you're the sort of person from my knowledge of you do think about things going forward in the future. So have you thought about how you may develop it sometime?
Yeah, I've thought of a couple of different things, little segments that I may throw in, on down the road or whatever. I know in the past you've had people, write you and ask you certain questions, and then you answer them on the podcast and everything else. So, I'll start doing things like that. Right. That way people can, ask certain questions and get their questions answered directly.
They also write to me, by the way, and tell me I'm an idiot from time to time. I don't answer them on that one.
Well, I have people tell me the same thing, so I'm already used to it.
Yeah. So we're not quite sure when the date it's coming out, but I'm hopeful it's going to be very, very shortly. But awesome. I might even have something to say about that after you and I get offline. But we'll see. We'll see how this goes. One other thing, as our hammock expert, our resident hammock expert, you're also going to come along to our Woods Hole weekend. And what are you going to do there? I know it's to do with hammocks.
Yeah, just going to demonstrate the hammocks. I'm going to probably bring about five different hammocks that I have up with me, different styles with different suspensions and all that, and just tell the differences between like the ultralight hammocks and then the not so light hammocks. The ones.
How ultralight is ultralight, by the way?
I have one hammock that is 4.78 ounces.
Wow. But no, that's not possible. No, as in, the whole thing. I've got a tent, okay, which is 19 ounces. Right. Which obviously makes it heavy according to you. But how to put a hammock up and all the various attachments and so on, you're not saying that's 4 ounces, are you?
Yes. Yeah, I have one hammock that with
it wouldn't take me, mate. I tell you.
Let's see, with the suspension, the hammock, and say a tarp, which is to keep you totally dry.
Sure.
I'm probably about 13, 14 ounces.
That is remarkable.
Because
that is remarkable.
One of the tarps that I have is only like 8 or 9 ounces in itself.
I bet you, Paul, people are listening to this thinking, there's no way I want to do that. I don't want to carry all that weight. Well, you just told me something I didn't know, that it was as light as that. So I'm really looking forward to this. So, I say we're not quite sure when it's going to come out, but we know it's going to come out. And we know that at Woods Hole, you're going to be talking about this. Yeah. You know what? All I can say, man, is welcome to the family. And I hope you really enjoy it. And I hope that you get the feedback you deserve because I know all the amount of work you've put into it. So welcome on board.
I appreciate it, and it's an honor to be part of the network.
Good to have you on, man. Okay, we'll speak to you soon, okay?
All right.
Cheers.
See you.
Do you know, Paul has really saved this show because he's taken so much off my plate, and I'll forever be grateful to him. Getting his show on my network is good for both of us. He'll get the exposure, and I'll have another, different offering on the channel. I'm excited. Now, putting a new podcast up all depends on the whims of Apple. And I told Paul that it could take as much as a week, maybe 2, before Apple would approve the show. Well, maybe because I already have a bunch of shows, they approved it within a couple of hours. We'd already decided that Fridays would be the Hammock Hangers Day, so I'm delighted to let you know that the first episode is actually already out, and it's had downloads, with the second episode coming out next Friday, September the 2nd. I really hope you give it a listen. As I say, Paul is very enthusiastic about hammocks, and he may very well convert you from a floor dweller to a tree dweller. Finally today, another chunk of the 6th chapter of Then the Hail Came. As I was reading it, I could imagine myself where George was writing about, only nearly 40 years later. It's so true that the Appalachian Trail resonates down the years, and we all share that thin, long path together. I'll see you next week. Saturday, the 4th of June, 1983, mile 397.7. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the moorland gap shelter as I strolled in, leading my faithful mule. Oddly, the place was full of emaciated backpackers. They watched with guarded expressions as I dropped my pack and started to prepare my lunch. A skeletal boy edged timidly over and sat down next to me. Greedy eyes surveyed my tang and peanut butter crackers. "Want some?" I asked. "Oh, it's no use, mister," he said in a curious, flat monotone. "Ramon will be the only one to feast on those crackers." I reached my hand inside my faded old serape, fished around in my pockets, and finally pulled out the half-smoked stump of an odd cigar. "I don't know who Ramon is," I said, "but nobody is enjoying this roughage but me." "Oh, you mustn't talk like that, mister," the boy cried. The other backpackers stared at me, fear and despair haunting their hollow eyes. Those nearest to me stood up and shuffled to the other end of the shelter. I shrugged calmly, pulled my hat brim down a little lower over my eyes, leaned back and munched a saltine. "I'll take the rest of those crackers, Americano," said a harsh, flat voice from behind me. I turned slowly, carefully removing the cigar stump from the corner of my mouth to spit out a stray shred of tobacco. Facing me across the shelter was the biggest, ugliest woods rat I've ever seen, more than 8 feet tall with a huge round beer belly. I pulled out a match and struck it against the stone of the shelter's foundation. With cool deliberation, I lit my cigar and exhaled a long, slow tendril of smoke. "I am Ramon," he said, his lips moving a little out of sync with his words. "This is my shelter, and any food that comes into it is mine." I gave him my trademark, dubious sneer, and dropped my cigar butt on the ground, crushing it slowly out with my boot. I picked up a saltine, calmly spread peanut butter on it, and popped it into my mouth. "Now you die, filthy Americano," he snarled, a full half-second before his lips began to move. He lunged for his rifle. "Roof," I replied, spitting out cracker crumbs. I flipped the right side of my serape over my right shoulder for faster access to my right hip. He quickly lifted his rifle, but I pumped 3 quick shots into him before he could fire. A weird, Spanish-sounding music was playing in the background as he slumped to the ground, his eyes filled with horrified amazement. "Who are you?" he groaned. "A backpacker," I said. His eyes rolled over, and he said no more. I strolled leisurely out into the blistering heat, wondering where the hell those bells and trumpets playing in the background were coming from. The other backpackers came running from the shelter, laughing and shouting. The boy ran up to me and tugged at the corner of my serape. "Hey, mister, who are you?" he asked. I smiled, flipped him a granola bar, and headed up the next ridge. There was a magnificent light show at the shelter last night, in the form of an extremely intense thunderstorm. Immense, jagged forms of lightning covering half of the sky shredded the darkness. Tremendous explosions of thunder, one right after another, vibrated through the valley as rain battered the tin roof of the shelter. Luckily, it was a relatively new shelter. The roof had not started to leak yet. The lightning had subsided by the time I awoke for the day at 6:30 a.m, but the deluge lingered on. I waited it out until 9 o'clock before the rain finally stopped. I set out immediately, feeling much better about my decision not to go on and tent it last night. The trail was a mess today. It passed over several steep, low ridges, severed by rugged ravines filled with lush rhododendron thickets and swampy streams. Ankle-deep gumbo bordered many of the streams, and a skin of tractionless wet clay covered most of the slopes. I was constantly catching myself on nearby trees and rocks in order to avoid nasty falls. On one occasion, I felt the bone in my ankle start to bend a little just before I caught myself. Nevertheless, I refused to slow down. Having found myself losing another battle with my personal demons lately, I was fighting mad today. Thus, the first 5 miles of the day were more an exercise in survival than a hike. Near the end of this stretch, just before it crossed a stream named Laurel Fork, the Appalachian Trail came out of the woods at the top of an old field, where I enjoyed my only views of the morning. There again were Roan and Hump Mountains and the intervening sweep of Balts. The summits were shrouded in thick, dark clouds. Undoubtedly a cold rain was falling on some poor sucker up there today. It was chilly even down at the elevation at which I was, but all that I had to deal with in the way of inclement weather were a few momentary sprinkles this morning. After crossing Laurel Fork, the trail became a little better, but the footway was still in miserable condition from last night's rain. On one stream crossing, I had to wade through muck up to my calves. On a muddy patch of clay just prior to the last steep 1 mile climb up to Moorland Gap Shelter, I took the backflip I had managed to avoid all morning. I wrote in the register at the shelter that the guy who laid out the relocation I walked this morning should be circumcised with a rusty tin can lid. It was a childish and snotty thing to write about hard-working volunteers, but I was feeling cranky after my backflip, so I was a bit of a dick. On a lighter note, I left in the register a story based loosely on those spaghetti westerns in which Clint Eastwood starred for Sergio Leone. It introduced the character of the backpacker with no name, who I intended to use in future register entries. This morning's trail had mostly consisted of 2 recent Appalachian Trail relocations. The afternoon hike from Moorland Gap to Laurel Fork Shelter was on an older, more established section of the AT with a firmer footway. There were some steep climbs as I followed the trail along the crest of White Rocks Mountain, but the walk was a Sunday stroll compared to the earlier trail. There were, however, some dangerous stretches when the AT descended over wet, mossy rocks as it followed a stream called Coon Den Branch off the mountain. I made it down in one piece to a half-mile paved roadwalk along Dennis Cove Road, passing a bunch of one-room shacks decorated with private and no trespassing signs, before the AT entered the woods again. It followed a flat, old railway grade for the next mile. A steep, rocky quarter-mile descent brought me to Laurel Falls, a wide 40-foot-high cascade emptying into a deep rock-walled pool. The trail then followed another old, abandoned railroad bed past numerous smaller cascades and rapids in Laurel Fork Gorge, where the stream makes a narrow passage between rocky cliffs lushly blanketed with pine, laurel and rhododendron. The rhododendron were finally in bloom, decked out with large reddish-violet blossoms, the first I've seen on this hike. Dozens of tents were pitched in the gorge. It was, after all, a Saturday night in June, and this was a beautiful spot with plenty of water and not far from a road. As I climbed a steep slope from the stream bank up to Laurel Fork Shelter, which clings to one of the walls of the gorge, I was worrying that the place would be full. I was too tired to relish the thought of having to pitch my tent and set up camp. The shelter was empty when I arrived. It still is. The valley below is teeming with people, yet I have this spot all to myself. The place is in fairly good condition, and a nearby small stream cascading down into the gorge has cold, delicious water for a change. The dense pine forest all around me shuts out the rest of the world. I'm enjoying an evening of quiet solitude right in the middle of a crowded valley. Today's 16.6 miles helped put the brakes on my rapidly plummeting self-respect. But I'm a greedy man. I want a big day for myself, either tomorrow or the next day. I want to put those demons on hold again for a while. Also, I want to be in Damascus, Virginia, early Tuesday, and that town right now is 48.7, 80 miles away. Another daunting climb looms tomorrow, on a new trail relocation of evil repute over Pond Mountain. If I can make 16 miles to Vandeventer Shelter on Iron Mountain, that would leave me in great shape for a 23-mile hike over relatively flat ridge crest the next day. That would put me, on Monday night, in a shelter 10 easy miles from Damascus. This is the logical way I should handle the 2.5 days hike to my next trail town. If, on the other hand, I can climb up and over Pond Mountain tomorrow, climb Iron Mountain and still cover the 23 miles to Iron Mountain Shelter, that would be awesome for me. I've been a real weenie since that initial 21-mile day out of Irwin, and I would surely like to be awesome again. Logic. Tomorrow night, I'll either be feeling good about what a silly bastard I was that day, or I'll be making sensible excuses about why I wimped out. Well, I do leave myself some wonderful options, don't I? Here I go again. Sunday the 5th of June, 1983, mile 420.6. Perhaps the reason I had the shelter all to myself was the furry creature who clattered around all night, waking me up repeatedly. I got the beam of my flashlight on him for a second, and I think he was a small raccoon. I see from comments in the shelter register that he is more or less a permanent resident of the place, so the local people probably know all about him. I woke up, without his help for once, at about 7:30, ate breakfast and left the shelter after 8:30, feeling tired and sluggish. I was laughing at myself for even considering last night that I had any chance of being awesome today. The first mile was an easy jaunt through the remainder of the gorge on a wide old railroad grade. I felt pretty good by the time I reached the start of the climb up Pond Mountain and was starting to have renewed visions of covering the 23 miles to Iron Mountain Shelter by nightfall. Ironically, it seems like every time I feel especially lousy when starting out in the morning, I put forth my strongest efforts once I get going. The climb out of the gorge and up Pond Mountain was a nightmare. Every bit as bad as I expected it to be, and then some. In the guidebook, the trail description occasionally read, "Ascend steeply." Most of the climb was steep. They saved those words only for the nearly vertical stretches. Were I to pick one mountain I've hiked in my life, the rewards of which were not worth the climb, Pond Mountain would be the one. The beginning of the climb was rather moderate, almost easy except for all the overgrown trail and large blowdowns, both of which have been so characteristic of the Appalachian Trail lately. Gradually, the grades became more difficult. The trail reached the ridge crest of the mountain and began to follow a well-worn jeep road. Grades usually moderate when a trail reaches the ridge crest, but these became even more arduous. It was agony trying to make decent time while carrying a heavy backpack up that terrible trail. Climbing that smooth incline was much worse than climbing steeply up rocks. Rocks at least gave a hiker level footholds from which to push off. To make matters worse, today was a very warm one, and the humidity was choking. I climbed for a half mile on that road past cliffs, which the guidebook seemed to indicate were the major scenic highlight of the section. They turned out to be 3 small peepholes through heavy foliage, socked in by a haze so thick it could almost have been called fog. Had I been up there on a clear day, they still would not have been worth all that climbing. After the final cliff, the jeep road ended, and the trail became even more sadistic. The grade was more than 45 degrees in several places, and both of my calves were soon cramping horribly. I could only keep myself going with the solemn promise that I would never climb Pond Mountain again for as long as I live. Somehow, I made it up to the vast plateau surrounding the summit. It was relatively flat and densely wooded, so there were no external indications that I was walking the crest of a rather lofty mountain. On the bright side, the woods were cool and pleasant, with rhododendron and azalea blooming wherever I looked. The air was full of hungry cries of baby grouse. Their nests seemed to be everywhere. West of the Blue Ridge, the mountains over which I'm now hiking are a big change from those I had traversed previously on this trip. These are like long folds in the land stretching for miles. Their ridge crests tend to be heavily wooded, with nothing resembling a summit peak to break up their flat-top profiles, just an occasional wind or water gap cutting through. Walking their crests, one looks much like another. This is going to take some getting used to after all the majestic scenery which I've been enjoying. I passed up the 1-mile side trail to the slightly higher bump on the plateau which formed the official summit of Pond, and followed the Appalachian Trail as it turned left off the ridge crest. For the next mile the trail was nearly level, but the footway was a rocky mess of erosion. Things became worse when it reached the top of a spur ridge and dropped straight off the mountain. I would not want to be on a ladder stood at that angle. The footway was muddy and treacherous. Many of the trees next to the trail were missing bottom limbs from hikers like me grabbing onto them for their lives as the ground gave way beneath them. The AT climbed over 3 knobs along that ridge, adding some sharp little ascents to the rigour of the long descent. Things slowly improved. There were actually a couple of switchbacks after the traverse of the highest knob, and the grade moderated greatly after the second one. The third and final knob was little more than a bump on the ridge. The descent came to an end at the point where the Appalachian Trail crossed US Highway 321. I'm not aware if that ridge had an official name, but I came up with a few choice ideas as I descended it. A small general store stood at the road crossing. A couple of ice-cold Cokes helped my mental attitude come round, as did the goodies I was able to buy for the trail. The owner of the store asked me what I thought of Pond Mountain, so I told him. I may have sounded just a touch bitter. He informed me that the United States Forest Service was negotiating to purchase 16 acres of land nearby, the acquisition of which would enable them to reroute the AT around Pond Mountain, making the trail 5 miles shorter and eliminating those awful climbs. This would have already happened, he said, but the landowner was refusing to sell. He was holding out for his price. He must have been a brave man, relating that story to crazed backpackers fresh from the Pond Mountain ordeal, because, as he then informed me, he himself was a recalcitrant landowner. I contemplated for a moment how much fun it would be to deep fry his testicles in light vegetable oil until the outsides were brown and crispy and the insides were moist and tender. But I kind of liked the guy and still had more miles to cover today. I just said goodbye and left. The Appalachian Trail after the US 321 crossing was very easy walking, but weird as hell, cutting through the hearts of two combination beach picnic areas along the shore of a large man-made body of water named Watauga Lake. Hundreds of happy people were playing and relaxing in the sun with friends and loved ones. I felt completely out of place. Proverbial outcast standing out in the cold, peering through a picture window at a large, warm family gathering. I passed through them like a ghost in their midst, the solitary wanderer. The feeling caught me by surprise. Until that moment, I had not been feeling particularly lonely today. I got the hell out of both areas as fast as I could. That little voice in my head seized upon my sudden sensation of exile and was telling me to go home and end this lonely, hopeless struggle. And damn, it was loud. After the beaches, the trail continued to shadow the shoreline through a residential area. Then things returned to normal as I followed the 80 along an undeveloped stretch of wooded lakeshore. Gradually, I shook off that case of the blues and was back to normal by the time I reached Watauga Shelter, where I had lunch. It was 1:30 and I had come 10 miles in 5 hours. That was not bad considering the challenges I had faced on Pond Mountain, but it was not good enough to advance the cause of the 23-mile day for which I had hoped. I left the shelter at 2 o'clock. I soon crossed Watauga Lake along the top of a huge pile of rocks poured into a narrow gorge. Watauga Dam looked like one of those emergency jobs that Superman was always building to save towns from onrushing floodwaters. Thank you, Superman. On the far side of the lake, I followed the dam's paved access road uphill for a while. When the road swung around the base of a steep little knob, the AT briefly left the pavement to climb over the knob before plunging straight down the other side. At that point, the trail crossed the road, re-entered the woods and began the ascent of Iron Mountain. It followed a steeply ascending spur ridge up through the chaotic tangles of a second-growth forest. The woods were rife with clouds of every type of insect imaginable, but I soon developed a special dislike for the flies. They swarmed my sweat-soaked body in hordes, and I was constantly brushing them off my arms, legs and face. They pestered me so much I amassed enough angry adrenaline to roar up that ridge despite fatigue. Soon I was on the long level crest of Iron Mountain. From that point, although the hiking was fairly easy, the woods continued to be very buggy, and the heat and humidity of the day was slow to abate as the afternoon wore on. The Appalachian Trail followed the ridge with no major climbs or descents to Vanderbilt Shelter. It was 5 o'clock when I arrived. Feeling completely used up after 16 very grueling miles, I decided to stay. The shelter was not very nice. Although the remainder of the ridge crest was quite dry, the ground around Vanderbilt was thick, oozing black mud, and the spot seemed to be home to half of the flies in Tennessee. Nevertheless, there was an excellent viewpoint of Watauga Lake and the surrounding valley from a rock outcrop just behind the shelter, and viewpoints are scarce on this mountain. I sat on that ledge for a half hour, enjoying the view, chasing away flies and making sensible excuses to myself about why I could not be awesome today. Then I stood up, put on my pack and began walking the 7 miles to Iron Mountain Shelter.